Enthusiasm is incredibly infectious, and people just want to ride that wave. It makes you feel good. That's kind of how I roll in the world.
Welcome to SheEO.World, a podcast about redesigning the world. I'm your host, Vicki Saunders. In each episode, you'll hear from SheEO venture founders, women who are working on the world's to-do list. These innovative business leaders are solving some of the major challenges of our times. Please sit back and be prepared to be inspired. Good morning, Tina. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you today. Welcome.
Same for me. Thank you for having me, Vicki.
This is really great. So let's start at the beginning. Who are you and why are you here?
Well, my name is Tina Roth-Eisenberg. I am a Swiss-raised and trained graphic designer that decided after she graduated graphic design to move to New York for what was supposed to be 3 months and found her new home. Resonated deeply with the city and has worked as a designer and then sort of quite accidentally but intuitively started multiple projects that have changed her life. So that's me.
Nice. And okay, so already at the start, I love how you just bring yourself forward. So projects versus companies, like serial entrepreneur, no, started multiple projects. Just talk to me about how your view around business. I mean, right there, that language really sort of sets it up for me anyway.
Yeah. Even though I grew up with two very entrepreneurial parents, I never speak of myself as a serial entrepreneur, or because to me, what it comes down to, what I've learned with myself is that I start projects from a very pure, heart-driven place. There are things that I want to see in the world that just bring joy, or just feel a need that I would like to see. But what is so interesting with the way I approach this is that I'm not driven by money, but money always comes, which I find a really interesting, sort of fact around how I've started everything. So just as an example, the thing that I'm the most proud of that I've built and has really zero intention around making money did start make money. So when I moved to New York 21 years ago, and I used to be a very social butterfly back in Europe when I was in university and stuff, and then I moved to New York and I didn't know a soul. And I remember this really sad Friday evening when I was sitting in my kind of shitty sublet in the East Village, and I was like, well, there's nobody to call. Where are my people? And I just remember when you're an expat, you become so incredibly intentional about your community. It's such a good lesson. And I was like, I need to find my people. And I was just craving a gathering of designers and creative-minded humans that are just open-hearted and generous and kind and a little idealistic as I am. And it took me a few years to create that gathering, and it's called CreativeMornings. And that, for example, was never meant to be a business for me. That was always meant to be just as this beautiful gift to the world. I give this to New York City. We just gather humans from a generous, creative place, and it has brought people to me that wanted to give me money to keep it running, which I just find is interesting for anyone who runs a business to always remind themselves that if what you do resonates, there will be ways of money flowing to you.
Totally. Yeah. One of my favorite lines is money follows vision.
Yep.
Right. And so that's absolutely amazing. It's so, you're already like on one of the things. I was writing down these questions this morning. I'm like, what do I want to ask Tina about? And one of the ones was, how did you find the others? And of course you answered the question before I had to ask it. Classic. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Creative Mornings. It is a deeply special community. You're one of the only people I know in the entire world who had a desire for this kind of a community. And your words, heart-centered and kind, is this just like, we are all looking to revamp how we come together as humans on the planet. And you've been doing this now for how long?
We just turned 12 years
so
old.
For 12 years. And bringing this community together. So let's talk a little bit about how it grew, how it evolved from the New York gathering of your people. And then tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So the reason why I started Creative Mornings, and the premise for those that don't know what Creative Mornings is, the premise is very simple. 12 years ago, I ran a co-working space. I unintentionally, accidentally created the first creative co-working space in Brooklyn. I didn't realize I was the first one. And the notion was very simple. I just wanted to surround myself with equally creative, kind, generous humans on a day-to-day basis. And what I realized is in that magic every day, being surrounded by people with complementing skills and just a really kind and generous mindset, is that, I mean, conversations were nourishing. All day was nourishing for me. And especially at the time, I was a mom with small children. I couldn't go out. So I kind of got my social nourishment over lunch or over coffee break. So I realized there's so many more out there. Like, this is the 8 million people city. Like, there's so many more creative people out there. So I just had the idea of one Friday morning a month, I'm going to open the door, put a little breakfast out, and have a 20-minute lecture. I mean, and this is the beauty of being a designer. It's just a prototyping mindset, not overthinking it, just like putting one thing out, seeing what works, and then you chisel away and make it better. But instantly we had like 50 people in my studio. And then the next time we had 70, and the next time we had 80. And so once a month, I just gathered the creative community. And I never thought about growing it. That was just my little thing I did in the city. And I did it for 2 years, and I did it incredibly scrappily, but it was beautiful. We got invited to other design studios, and 6 months in, we were at Google, which was kind of to me like, oh, okay, there's something there if Google is hosting us.
Yeah.
But again, for 2 years, I just ran it by myself. I often paid breakfast just by myself. It was fine. It was just, it nourished me. And but then I was approached by 2 friends, and I'm sure that wasn't an accident. Within a week, one of them wanted to take it to Zurich, and one of them wanted to take it to LA. And that was kind of a big moment for me. But the good thing is, because I knew them, I kind of knew there was a certain trust there and they wouldn't disappoint me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to figure out, if I want to make sure that the soul of this can, expand all over the world, I need to be incredibly clear in what I call the non-negotiables are, what the values are, what needs to stay the same. But then also, given that these are creative humans, I need to give them freedom to explore and experiment. So we created sort of a non-negotiables. These are the things that need to stay the same, that you have to do in order to be the host/ambassador in your city. But beyond that, please go experiment and tell us what works. So there's an incredible level of trust that I had to extend. But my favorite phrase is, that I sort of came up with in this whole process of building Creative Mornings, is trust breeds magic, because Creative Mornings is pure magic. And when you trust someone, you allow. I keep telling myself all the time, it's the biggest compliment of all. Trusting someone, you get the best out of them. Granted, we have to also make sure that we get really good people with good values. And so we had to create a system there. But anyway, long story short is that those 2 friends sort of became the catalyst for me to think, well, maybe there's more. And we've never reached out to anyone. This is pure organic. So we're now 12 years later into 220 cities in 67 countries, happening every month, completely volunteer driven. So we have 1,500 volunteers, and these are humans. They're just they're very special. They're in service of their community. They're in service of gathering their creative communities, and it's very humbling, to be honest. It's a very special type of human that is attracted to this and wants to spend their free time on organizing free events.
I'm just in awe of everything you've created, as you know. And when we came down with our little baby SheEO organization, when we were getting started, and said, how did you do this? Because it is very magical and very special. I wonder if you've sort of stepped back and looked at what you've built and thought, if money got put into this system, would everything go sideways?
I have goosebumps right now as you ask me this. Yeah, I'm actually a firm believer that it would have. And, a lot of people, first of all, when I initially had the idea that I want this to be free, And in the morning, all the New Yorkers pushed back and said, like, nobody will show up at 8:30. And I was like, I'll prove you wrong. But also they all said, you will never be able to keep this free. And I remember last year we had Esther Perel speak in New York. It was a venue with 750 people. We had Balthazar breakfast. We fed them all. It was incredible. And I was sort of doing the math in my head. If we had to pay Esther Perel a speaking fee, if we had to pay for the venue, if you all added up, I think a ticket would have been around $150 a person.
Yeah.
And we are able to do this for free. There is an innocence and a purity to it because there is no money flowing. That I think has been the secret sauce why we can grow it.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I feel exactly the same way. And there's all this, there's something, the spirit of radical generosity that we have as SheEO feels like a similar kind of vibe, right? It brings the best in people forward.
Mm-hmm.
It gives them a place to show up whole and to share all those incredible, like MJ would call them sort of our overflow of our abundance of mastery in something.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So people who just really want to contribute. That's amazing.
I remember when I met you and you introduced me to the term radical generosity. And it was shortly after I realized that, and I mean, that resonated so deeply because the business model of Creative Mornings is radical generosity. That's it.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Well, but I also it's also dangerous. I think as a designer, you probably have felt through all these things. We're both very feeling leaders, but as soon as you name something, it starts to lose a bit of its energy as well. And so I kind of love the fact that what does it even mean? Like, what do these words actually mean? They're still in flow because there's so little of it, I think, maybe in the world, or maybe we just can't see it yet. I want to ask you, one of the things that I think is one of your unbelievable superpowers is relationship building. And so you talk, you're like, interesting. You talk about trust and trust breeding magic. And so do you have a theory or a practice that you notice about yourself around building relationships?
That's so funny. I don't see myself having a superpower in building relationships. That's interesting. I always find it so interesting how we perceive each other, right? And what we're good at. But I don't know. The only thing I know is that I just love humans, and I will always assume the best intentions until you prove me wrong. And that is an idealistic worldview that has oftentimes been criticized by people who are more jaded. And I'm like, I will not give up on that. I will lean into love before you have to prove me wrong that it's not, And I think there's something there when you just show up, just really, and then it's my enthusiasm. I think my superpower is enthusiasm. If you come towards me with like an open heart and some interest in what we're doing or whatever, I will just steamroll you with enthusiasm and love. And then, and there's something to be said. I mean, enthusiasm is incredibly infectious, and people just want to ride that wave. It makes you feel good. I mean, that's what I think is the secret sauce of Creative Mornings. No matter how jaded you show up at a Creative Mornings and you have your walls up and it's the first time and you're like, what's the deal here? What's the catch? This can't be real. And then you just feel so good when you leave because people were kind and generous and there's no MO, and then you kind of leave and you're like, damn, that felt really good. I want more of that. That's kind of how I roll in the world. Yeah. Like if we're resonating, if there's something there, then come on that wave with me.
Very true. Energy is a real, we use a lot of energetic words, right? When we're speaking with each other, we're talking about like resonating with each other and following the energy. Do you do work around energy? I know that you come from sort of interesting background with your family, paying attention to energy and the sort of spiritual nature that is often left out of a lot of our conversations. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm so happy when people ask me it, because nobody ever does. So, hey, Vicki. Well, I grew up in the Swiss Alps, and the area of Switzerland I grew up was like that state I grew up in was the first state that allowed for holistic healers in Switzerland to open shop. So it sort of became that, probably the equivalent of, I don't know, Arizona here in the States or something. And so I just grew up with a lot of kooky things, in my day to day. And then my dad, who was like a totally badass entrepreneur, at the same time was really interested in past lives and past life regressions, and he did them in our living room. So talking about reincarnation was something I grew up all my life, and how the process of dying is actually a beautiful process, and like sort of just, you don't actually understand how much you absorb as a kid just by being in the presence of these conversations. So I just believe a lot of things that just, have to do with energy, and that this life is not our only life, and all of that. So when I moved to New York, interestingly enough, and I was my open, blabby self, I realized that I just really shocked a lot of people with my beliefs. And what I noticed happening is, like, I had to kind of close down just to protect myself. When I protected my angel books, I put them in a different bookshelf that not everybody could see. But it's just so beautiful to see how that is actually is changing right now in our society. There's a more openness. And I've always been someone who, like, when I started my first business and I went to get like all of the business books because I wanted to be a super pro boss lady, and I read these books and I was like, well, what the heck, man? Why are they not talking about the things that are important to me? It's love and showing up, nourishing, and where's play? Where's fun? and so to
Yeah.
me, that's how I approach business, because in the end of the day, if you want to put it in spiritual terms, is you're vibing higher. Those are high vibrational states, right?
Yeah.
And I am totally open with my employees. They know I'm super woo. I share articles, I share things I do or see or read.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like, I can see that, some of them, it took them a moment, but they're just opening up, and they're also starting to use words like resonance and energy, and it makes me so happy, because I truly believe that we're in a time of awakening, the business world, and going from the purely analytical into our hearts. And I am so here for it. I'm
Oh, me too.
I'm in the
Yeah.
front line with a marching band. It's like, come
Yeah,
on,
me too.
everybody, let's do
Leading the
it.
parade. Here we go. Oh,
Yeah.
it's so true. I mean, I remember, I'm very much aligned with you, as we know, in the woo-woo sense of life,
Yeah.
giving out crystals at dinner parties and all the magic stuff. And I just love the actual visual I have in my head now of Tina trying to be a super pro boss lady, reading business books, going, what the heck? Like, hilarious, like so completely hilarious. And it strikes me because earlier this week, we're all now, of course, in COVID and sort of lockdown, or not all of us. New Zealand is free, but the rest of us
Lucky
are,
them.
yeah, exactly, in our spaces. And I remember, like, limiting language is something that I'm super attuned to. When people
Mm-hmm.
say negative things before doing something,
Mm-hmm.
which basically sets them up for, like, not a great outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our team members sent me a picture that she was pulling a card before sending out an email for intention. She goes, okay, I'm just
No.
about to send out a big mail merge, and I'm pulling a card, Vicki, and here's my card. And it was this great card, and so they sent it in Slack, and I'm like, yes, the future. Just this concept of, like, what intention you show up with, your heart-centered approach, your care for others, people
Mm-hmm.
feel,
Mm-hmm.
and then it shows up in their work. To your point,
Yep.
this, like, higher vibe. I think it's absolutely
Can
critical.
I
There's
add?
so much more. Yeah,
Let me
go.
add one thing here, because that
Yeah.
is something. So I'm like you. The limiting beliefs is really something I'm paying attention to, and to the point where last year with my leadership team at Creative Mornings, we started pointing each other out when we are saying limiting beliefs, even though we're
Mhm.
all super attuned. We didn't catch it all the time, so we would
Yeah.
just do a little,
Yeah. Yeah.
point at each other, and then we go like, oh my God, that was a limiting belief, what I just
Yeah.
said. And it's so beautiful when you can bring sort of this kind, safe spirit to work as well, where you can, like, I'm a firm believer that work should be the playground and the school of your future self, where
Yes.
you don't have to just pretend you know it all, or like it should be just a really beautiful, safe, and let's help each other grow kind of environment. And I feel like I'm so lucky I have that with my team at Creative Mornings.
Well, it's the leadership of creating a space for that, right? And it is really different. So you have to find different kinds of people who will actually step into the transformation, right? And the opportunity for it. I mean, I think I check in with everyone on my team each week, and we have this like little framing for showing up. And one of the questions that I want you to kind of report on, whatever, show up and say is, what are your pain points? And I remember when I first started talking about that, people would be like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not in pain. Yeah, but like, what is it that you're not getting done? What are things? And which is like the opposite that anyone would ever talk to their like boss lady about, to use your language. And I'm like, no, that's the gift, right? It's like, if you show up with a thing that you're not getting done, it's data, it's information for us to go, oh, those are things you don't like to do. Let's find someone else who likes to do those. But the unwinding, wow, like, are you going to write a book about your, what is like I have to go back to your phrase because I thought it was hilarious. This is the perfect title for your book, The Super Pro Boss Lady Guide to getting it done. Well, I mean, it's opposite land.
I know. I have another example that is similar to what you just said in terms of what you asked them, those two questions when you check in with them. So I think that we do in our weekly check-in as a group, we're still small enough that we can do this. Granted, you can do it with smaller groups if you're in a large company, but I must say this is one of the most successful things to what I call, they don't know this, but I call it aligning hearts. So before we start our weekly sort of check-in, and we do what we call cherries and pits, where we go through the whole group and everyone shares one thing that bums them out. That's the pit. Like something that happened since last week, and that doesn't have to be, so in the beginning people think it has to be semi-professional. No, it can be anything that bums you out right now, because it's such good context setting for us to understand where somebody's at. And then the cherry is like something positive that happened. And I must tell you, like, just starting out the meeting like that and just humanizing the space we're in, and allowing people to also just say, I am not doing well because, and sometimes actually it gives you a point of reference and you start understanding, oh, they've been really down the last 2 days because, I don't know, they're dealing with something really big, which you need to give it space to show up. And again, to me, that moment is really sort of an aligning of hearts and getting us all in sort of the same heart space, and not just be like, hey, what do we get done? And how productive are we? What are the numbers? I mean, that's important too, but
yeah, the to-do list, like that sort of over. Yeah, that's interesting. It's I like the two pieces as well, the cherries and the pits. Because I think lots of organizations do check-ins now, right? Where you do a quick one-word check-in or something to like, again, create the space for humans. And I've been doing a lot of calls with Indigenous leaders lately. And they always have the paradox of the two things you're holding. It's never a one-word check-in, it's a two-word check-in. And so anxious and excited. You can be both at the same time, right? This framing. And so I love the cherries and the pits. It's actually very Indigenous, that place of coming, holding two things. So
also, you know what's funny? Anxious and excited is a word that we coined into Anxited at Creative Mornings, because that's kind of the state we're in. We're so excited all the time.
Oh my God, of course. Look at the two of us vibing here. I love it. I listened to an interesting podcast yesterday, and there was a phrase that was used which reminded me of you. And I wanted to see if this resonated with you too. But it was, I witness you as being very settled into your wisdom. Do you feel a little settled into your wisdom?
Well, first of all, thank you.
You're welcome.
I would say now I'm starting to really feel that. A few years ago, I was still doubting sort of that this is actually mine. But I mean, I've done, my story, and I've done a lot of inner work over the last 5 years. And it's actually interesting. And especially with how COVID has changed our lives, I feel like there's a lot of clarity around who I am in the world and what is important that has sort of happened. I mean, eternally grateful for the lucky position I'm in, that, you know, I'm not going hungry, and I'm actually, I can, even though things are hard, I can lean into sort of the beauty that comes out of this year. And what's interesting is that I am starting to have the desire to write a book, which to me is what you're saying. Like, I mean, I'm starting to trust my own wisdom to put it actually into written form. So, but to be honest, for me, it's a really big journey to trust my own inner voice and to accept that that is actually valuable for other people. Like, it's interesting when people talk to me that have seen me give talks, and I tell them what an incredible struggle it is for me to work on those. And I just last year actually had 2 moments where I gave talks where I could physically sense that I was standing in my power for the first time ever. That was, I was fully standing in my truth, and that was me. That was, there was no kind of like, you know, are they going to understand? Are they going to, you know, is it going to resonate? No, I was just standing solidly in my truth. And that is I'm sure anyone who gives talks can relate to that. That's an incredible feeling. And so, yes, I think I'm settling into my wisdom.
I love it. I love it, because we need you, right? We need those stories. We need those different perspectives. I think we're just really, at the moment, my perception is we're between worlds, right? This old world and this old approach is failing us, and it's obvious every day, so much more every single day. And where we're going isn't yet quite clear. And so the ability to sort of stand in that uncertainty and get ready for the transformation, it needs a new operating system, essentially, for humans. What's that going to be?
A much more gentle operating system.
Yeah, absolutely. Bravery and courage. These, I think about the courage to actually be the super pro boss lady. Is that part of the journey as well for you? You know, finding your way along this?
See, it's so interesting. People always say, you're so courageous, or you have such a high risk appetite, you know? And I'm like, no, I'm a Capricorn. I'm from Switzerland. I'm the most safe human, you know, like, but then it's interesting how we perceive ourselves. I think one of the reasons why I run so many different things is because, you know, the table analogy, if one of the things fall off, at least I have still some other. That to me is just some controlling safety, want to make sure I'm not going under situation. And people perceive it as like, you're so I mean, you're just so leaping into all of these different risky endeavors. And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to create safety for me. But I don't know. I wouldn't call myself courageous. I think I'm really good in being in complete denial of what could go wrong.
Classic entrepreneur, not calling yourself an entrepreneur. I get it. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, because I had one of my favorite coaches, MJ Ryan. We were doing this whole thing around risk with our organization. And I'm like, I don't view that as risk. I don't view that as risk. And she goes, that's because you're not even on the chart of risk. Like, you're so far off the chart, you don't even think of it as risk. So I maybe laugh at you on that one, because in a sense, it's sort of a risk mitigation strategy to have multiple things going on.
Yeah, I think it is. But don't you think that, I remember when, you know, Creative Mornings, for example, has gone through many really stressful times where I wasn't sure if I'm going to make it. And then this dear friend of mine who I just admire so much, and who's just a smart human, very grounded human, he said, come on, let me just talk you through a few things. And I was just totally, that was in my time, you remember, when my life was changing a lot on a lot of fronts, where I was just fear spiraling. I didn't have any tools to catch those things. Again, I'm going into energetic talk, but eventually they're just like giant trains barreling down a mountain if you don't catch them early enough. And I was like fear spiraling or crazy. And my friend said to me, was like, what's the worst that could happen? I was like, well, Creative Mornings is going to go bankrupt, and this is going to go bankrupt, and everything's going to go fall apart. And then he just looked at me, but with such a calm, like just such calm, and said, Tina, you can turn on the money hose if you need to. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, Tina, you can go and get a job. Like, you have so many skills. Like, somebody will hire you. And I think in the back of my mind, I've always known I'm hireable. If everything falls apart, I'll find a job. And I think when you have sort of like your own safety net in the back of your mind, I was like, I'm going to be fine. That really helps.
It is interesting because we do forget that. And I think this is one of the things where I think at this moment in time in particular, being in community and getting surrounded by the others is really important, because it's so hard often to see these things ourselves. To your point, it's if you want to get rid of limiting beliefs, or if you want to at least be aware of those limiting beliefs and how they influence you, it's easier to do it if someone else is helping you figure it out. It's like, hey, you just said that. Oh, I did? Oh my God, I didn't even realize it, right?
I call it, thanks to my friend Sharon, she taught me this term, and I just love it so much. It's helped me actually in the business world how to see that. I call it the web of love. The people that just will have your back, that you can introduce to, like, it's just like, for example, she told me at one point, if you have, let's say, sponsors or partners or clients that you just love, there's just a deep, nourishing relationship and a win-win on every level, right? She says, go to them and ask them for, who else should I work with? This is so wonderful. Is there someone that you think I should know? Or just with friends even. We did once a undercover singles event with Creative Mornings, where we just asked people we loved, is there someone you love that should come to who's single, to come to this event? So it was sort of the web of love in action. And there is just something to be said that when you trust someone, and there's just a friendship and love there, that whoever they're introducing you to, for whatever reason that is, you show up with such trust and like a deep connection right away that otherwise has to be earned, and you don't know, are they for real or not? So I just keep thinking about when I'm hitting a wall or something, or I need help, it's like, how can I activate my web of love?
Boom. Oh my God. I love that so much. Activating the web of love. It's what we keep noticing at SheEO, because it's this concept of radical generosity and stepping into it. And we do everything kind of the opposite of everybody else. 0% interest loans. Yeah, exactly. That people are like, what, huh? And the only way our community has grown is through that trusting relationship of, Tina told her two friends and they told their two friends. And it sort of comes with ease when it goes that way. Otherwise, there's way too much explaining and convincing, and it's like, forget it. That's just way too hard. But I wonder about the trust piece as well, because one of the tools that I've learned, and you just shared a piece of it from your perspective too, which is when you vibe immediately with somebody, like I did with you, we met each other. It was like, boom, okay, soul sister. It didn't take time to build that relationship. It happened in an instant, right? And so I often, when I find amazing people like that, and we meet each other again, my husband says the family's coming together, as how he talks about it. It's like, who are the 5 people like us that we haven't each met? And that, so coming from that position is so much easier than like going into that huge room and going, oh my God, how do I find the one person in here who's my soulmate? It's hard. It is. So I love that. I think there must be some energetic theory around that somewhere that we'll learn later and go, oh, that was the secret to everything.
I mean, what you're doing is all web of love, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is.
It really is.
I love it. And it's funny because you even said at the beginning, I'm learning all these things again too, that trust breeds magic. We keep saying when you show up on these calls each week with SheEO, because we're doing them each week, is this hashtag SheEO magic. Again, you went into a small group of 4 people, you asked for help, and the person was in your room. Like, how does that happen week after week? It's so crazy. But again, when it comes from trust, Tattly. How's it going? What's happening with Tattly? And what is Tattly? Give us a quick.
So Tattly is a temporary tattoo company that I started 9 years ago. I still have to laugh when I tell this story because
it makes me just laugh watching you laugh. Yeah.
So, okay, here's how it happened. So I have a daughter who's now 14, but at the time I think she was 7. Wait, math, whatever. And she came home from so I'm a trained designer, right? So I have kind of high demands into aesthetics that's around me. So anyway, she came home from another birthday party, and in this shitty goodie bag were these like designs, these tattoos that were just such an insult to my Swiss aesthetic. I was like, I can't deal with this one more time. And so I have this personal rule that if I keep complaining about something, because in Switzerland people complain all the time and I can't stand it. I keep telling myself, if you catch yourself complaining repeatedly about something, you have two options, Tina: do something about it or just let it go. And, and I was like, I can't let this one go. So I'm a designer. At the time, I ran a design studio. I was like, wait a second, I have so many illustrator friends. I can create a website without a problem. I can brand this thing. And then so 2 months later, I launched Tattly sort of as a joke. So my daughter could have really cool temporary tattoos by really cool artists. But then the second day in business, the Tate Modern Shop called the buyer. And I was in complete shock in my office. And he's like, congratulating me on the brand and asking me how long we've been in business. And I'm like, 2 days. And then he asked for a wholesale catalog. And I remember I was cool as a cucumber. I was like, sure, no problem. I wrote down his information and then I hung up. And I remember turning to my studio mates. I was like, what the heck is a wholesale catalog? Does this mean I need packaging?
Oh my God.
And then it just, and I have never sold a product. I knew nothing about margins. Like, oh my God, talk about a really steep learning curve. And then that just bootstrapped the heck out of it. I hired young, super enthusiastic people and we figured it out one by one. And so now, fast forward 9 years later, and with COVID, given me so much clarity on where my energy should go.
Right.
I've ran Tattly as a side project for the last 9 years, and which kind of hurts me in my soul because it's an incredibly loved brand. We have over 120 legit incredible artists that we license art from. We're shipping all over the world. We're in like 1,000 stores. We're in all the museum stores. I mean, if you look at the story of Tattly, and considering that I ran this as a side project, it is a freaking miracle. But when COVID hit and over 60% of our whole income is wholesale, that was really hard. And I had to basically let the whole team go because overnight, sort of 60-70% of our income was gone. And now we're back to like a small crew, and I'm trying to sell Tattly, trying to find it a new home. And it's just, and again, talk about like I'm a big believer that Tattly is an incredible teacher in my life.
Yes.
Because I've just learned so many things, and especially now in this sort of in this moment of finding a new home for something you have built and feeling into how can I honor this company? I really believe that Tattly is an entity that has a soul and has feelings and has like I really am all out there, and I just want to do Tattly right. And I've been going through so many acquisition conversations over the last 7 months where sometimes I would get off these calls and my heart would want to just fall into a million pieces because I was like, no, there's no way this person will get this labor of love, because they don't get it. They just don't get it. And then there's people, that your heart starts singing and you're like, oh my God, if only you can adopt Tattly. And it's just an interesting story. And there are some people we're talking to right now. But I mean, for me, and maybe you can relate because you've run multiple businesses, it's like, how do you honor it? Because I am not entirely driven by money, but at the same time, I would love to see an exit, right? So, but then there's like this balance of what is the right thing to do, what is the right intention, or what is the right sort of, I don't know. I'm still learning a lot, but I must say, the thing I've never thought about is that when you start a project, you don't really think about how hard it is actually to end it as well.
Yeah. It's very true. There's like this birth and dying process, right? Or like rebirth, whatever's happening at the end.
Yeah.
And I don't know how. It's so funny. One of the first things I learned when I was getting more involved in sort of the original venture capital spaces, as you're starting, you're asked about how you're going to end it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's your exit strategy? And I always found that so bizarre. I'm like, I'm just starting. Like, why would I think about that?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the whole like capitalist, old school, just flipping things vibe, right? That just is like so,
wrong
antithetical.
incentive. Wrong incentive.
Totally wrong incentive in every single way. So what are the gifts of COVID for you? Let me stretch you here a little bit.
No, I just always have a hard time answering that question without hurting people who are hurting,
Yeah, no,
because I feel
course.
like it's a very privileged lens I have. So I just want to acknowledge that. To me, COVID has been incredibly humbling and a big teacher in that, just as an example, Creative Mornings I built because I believe true connections are made face to face and not behind a screen. I'm the biggest face to face proponent, and so that was really important to me, that, you know, everything is face to face. And then COVID hits, and the whole premise of why we exist is taken away. And I was completely numb. Like, I was in shock. And then a community is not a community until it self-organizes. But our hosts, like Denver, Calgary, and Austin, on March 13th, hosted the first virtual events. And I attended one after another, and I was in tears. Because they instantly flipped it. We have a saying, like, flip it when you have a problem, just like flip it on its head and make it positive. They instantly flipped it. And I felt very humbled, and felt like, wow, Tina, where are you closed off in life in general, not just with your own company? Because now we've had over 800 virtual events, and we have started to define what is possible, how the notion of the good feel of Creative Mornings can translate to virtual. And it's not a one-to-one translation. We had to experiment and figure out, how do we get into people's hearts the way we do in IRL? And I'm realizing that I've been really closed off. Because, for example, Field Trips, it's sort of a workshop series that we've prototyped in New York for 3 years, which I really believe is sort of basically put a peer-to-peer university on top of Creative Mornings. And we had over 600 in New York. And we tried to figure out, how can we scale this in other cities? And the biggest problem was venues. How are we going to figure out? Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Field Trips has exploded. We had over 200,000 signups since March. And again, I'm like, damn, Tina, you didn't want to see it's possible.
Yeah.
So to me, I feel the big lesson from COVID is, Tina, where, again, limiting beliefs, where do you not see an opportunity that you had to be forced into? Don't have to be like, just maybe see them before, you know. And then also with Tattly, I mean, if I'm really honest, I was having a hard time for a long time, and I was trying to sell it for a while already. And even though as horrible it was to let the team go, I almost felt like, wow, I can do it without feeling completely guilty and a loser. And some other business owners have told me the same thing, that they were already kind of at the end of their energy. And I know this is I probably shouldn't say it out loud, but there was some relief there that, you know, I was given some outside circumstances that allowed me to, you know, reduce the team.
Yeah, we've noticed quite a bit of rethinking with some of our ventures as well, where the COVID experience has had them step back and go, wait a minute, I built this whole beast that I have to feed. And it's like, I'm no longer at the center of why I started this. What does that mean? And so there's quite a journey for many of us, I think.
That's a really difficult position.
It's hard.
For some. It's
so
really hard.
Yeah,
because you,
absolutely.
especially if you're a heart-centered leader and you just love all your people so much, and but I feel like that's a lesson that when people come to me now, especially younger entrepreneurs, like, keep checking in with yourself, because I've been drained by Tattly for 2 years, and I don't mean to say this as I'm complaining about the company I've built, but I think it's important that we actually stay in touch with, is this still feeding me?
Yeah.
Because you don't do anyone the service, because your team senses it if you're drained by it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, my husband, Richard, and I every day are like, what worked today? What didn't? What do we want to tweak? And constantly like feeling we are the designers of our life. If it's not working, how do we shift it? Because I've had lots of journeys along the way of starting these projects and companies where I found myself going, how did I get here? Oh my God, I hate everything I just created. What did I just do? And so I'm so acutely aware of that with SheEO, that I don't want to mess this up, because I want to love this. And I do, but it's a constant paying attention to what's working and what's not, and where are we going. Yeah.
I will take that with me, Vicki.
Yeah, it's a continuous thing. It doesn't end. It's not like, okay, good, that's the right strategy. Every day almost, especially now, I feel like every week is a year. There's just it's just like fast forward insanity on all this stuff. I love you so much.
I love you too,
Here
Vicki.
today.
You know, I have this thing when I've my word of the year is resonance. As you can probably tell, it comes up a lot. And I'm really trying to deeply, deeply listen to my body when I talk with people, when I experience things. And I have this thing that I'm noticing now that when, you know, I call it when I'm in the presence of truth, I get really warm and fuzzy here. It kind of expands. I had that multiple times during our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely a blessing to have known you, and keep on doing it, sister. You're incredible.
Well, says Vicki, who's changing the world.
Thank you so much. Do you have an ask? By the way, we always end with an ask if you have one. Do you have an ask for the community?
Just think about how you can show up with an open heart and kindness in your day to day.
Nice. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you for listening to the SheEO.World podcast. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it with a friend and subscribe on your favorite podcast player. If you'd like more information about SheEO, please visit our website at SheEO.World. That's SheEO.World.